So Robert Frost was known as a nature poet, but he wasn't just interested in nature outside. He wanted to know what our human relationship to nature is. Um, so it wasn't just the trees and the outer nature, it was the inner nature of humans as well. So his most famous poem is A Road Not Taken, and that's going to inspire our first prompt. I often find that when I want to write a poem, the best inspiration is reading other poets. Um, Poetry leads to poetry. So I'm going to read The Road Not Taken. I've printed out a fun little visual. So it's just two roads diverged in a yellow wood, which is what the poem is about. Well, actually, it's not what the poem's about, but that's the image in the poem, so we're going to go with that. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. This poem is often read at graduation ceremonies because it seems very uplifting and inspiring in that here's a speaker and there's two paths before them, and one seems less worn and more to explore. So the speaker takes that road and has made all the difference. But if you read the poem closely, both roads are about the same. So the real change doesn't come from the actual road as much as it comes from within the speaker. So one of the prompts we could do is to begin where this poem leads off. Because if you actually read it too, at the end, the speaker hasn't even taken the road. It says, in the future I'll be telling this. I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And then your poem could explore what differences that made. Or you can even have how he has it where it didn't even really happen. You could have your speaker saying, I imagined I took the road less traveled and it had made all the difference, and then list how those differences manifested in your life. Another one you can do is just make it even broader is, what if your poem time travels? Write a poem where the speaker takes a strange road and finds he or she has time traveled either into the future or into the past. It could be a personal past or future, maybe imagining your mother or father or grandmother or grandfather as they might have been at your age now, or imagining yourself as your mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather's age now. So you could either imagine your grandparents or parents when they were younger, or imagine yourself being older. Another prompt I have for us is that writers tend to have their own vocabulary, words that they tend to use often, almost like a fingerprint of lexicon. So I know I use the word ghost way too often. I know I use the word moon, all the poetry words that we poets like to use. So there are things called word clouds, and this is from Joanne Jeffries and Julian Yanover, and they did a poetic word cloud of Robert Frost's most often occurring words in his poems. You can see that. That just gives you an idea, and it mimics his author photo. So it's in the outline of his silhouette. So I'll read some of these words that occur. The most reoccurring words are had and him, which speaks to that Robert Frost wasn't just a nature poet, but he was very concerned about human beings in the world, not just the world at large, the inner and outer. So these are the words that most often can be found in Robert Frost's poetry. So I thought it'd be fun to write a poem that used a lot of the same vocabulary that Robert Frost used. Reading from Joanne Jeffries and Julian Yanover. Robert Frost is highly regarded for his command of American colloquial speech and his realistic depictions of rural life. Consequently, it comes of little surprise that some of his most commonly used words relating to nature and outdoor life include tree, trees, flowers, wind, leaves, birds, and wood. What is perhaps more curious is the element of nostalgia and reflection on the past that seems to be very prominent through the use of had, back, dead, and thought. The words go, nothing, away, and death speak to the theme of isolation, which was common throughout a lot of Robert Frost's poems. The two most frequently used words in Frost's poems are had and him, and while the former can be related to the theme of isolation, it could simply be more straightforward than this. His poems always dealt with man in relation with the universe. This is the perspective they came from, which is no doubt why those words were so prominent. So for our prompt, we can write a poem that incorporates as many of Frost's most frequently used words as you can. Write a poem that incorporates as many of the opposite words. So for him, the opposite could be her. The opposite of love would be hate. You would have to decide what the opposite of flower is. What is the opposite of house? Or you could do a combination of both. You can decide which words you want to use and then which opposites you want to plug into the poem and see how that shapes your poem. So I have another prompt. This is going to be based on Robert Frost's Neither Out Far Nor In Deep. And I picked this poem because Key West is an island, and I think this speaks to island life a little bit. Um, so, neither out far nor in deep. The people along the sand all turn and look one way. They turn their backs on the land. They look at the sea all day. As long as it takes to pass, a ship keeps raising its hull. The wetter ground like glass reflects a standing gull. The land may vary more, but wherever the truth may be, the water comes ashore and the people look at the sea. They cannot look out far. They cannot look in deep. But when was that ever a bar to any watch they keep? So you see that looking out and looking in recurring in his poetry. But I thought, since we live in Key West and it's a beautiful island, um, to write a poem about standing on a beach and looking into the water and what emotions, what images, what trains of thought come into your mind. And because we're quarantined, it might not be so easy to actually get to the beach. We're all trying to practice social distancing and staying home. Um, but if you live in Key West, then you most certainly know how beautiful the water is, and you can remember that and think upon that. And that would be very appropriate, I think, for a nature poem in Key West and Robert Frost, because Robert Frost did love Key West. I decided to go the opposite now, since we did what I think is more of a Key Westy prompt with the ocean, and pick a totally different terrain. So Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which is another one of Frost's most famous poems. Um, and I thought the prompt for this could be to write about an environment that is in contrast to Key West, something mountainy. I mean, Key West is very flat. We're surrounded by water. So something that's like, the Great Plains would be in contrast. And it doesn't have to be the whole poem. I think what could make it very interesting is if it were a Key West poem, but somehow can make a connection to a terrain that's completely different. So Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He'll not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And obviously another challenge to the poem would be to end on a repeated line. Frost definitely pays attention to meter and rhyme. I pay attention to rhythm. I don't necessarily count meter, and I like my rhyme internal. But you could definitely, use his form as an inspiration point. Get some rhyme in that poem since you're going to have the repetition at the end. So for the last prompt, I'm going to offer a persona poem. Um, so that would be to take an inanimate object and write from the point of view of that object. So stapler could be the object. My favorite tea mug can be the object. Um, but to do it in such a way that you believe that if the stapler or the teacup could speak, this might be what they say. And this is not quite a persona poem. It goes into personification just a little bit, but it's a small little poem and it has the word flower in it, so I had to pick that one. Lodged. The rain to the wind said, "You push and I'll pelt." So they smote the garden bed that the flowers actually knelt and lay lodged, though not dead. I know how the flowers felt. And I thought that was a good one too, because there's hope and inspiration in that poem. Right now, we might be feeling scared and just beat down by this crazy, scary disease out there, the coronavirus. Um, but we, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. We will overcome this. And this poem speaks to that because the flowers, they're going through a difficult time right now, but they're going to be okay. So I invite you to write a persona poem. I invite you to write a poem that uses a lot of the same language that Robert Frost poetry uses. Use the opposite of that. If you want to take it a step further, I like to get the dictionary out and I'll flip through the dictionary and I'll find words that maybe I hadn't thought about in a while. Sorry, Fiddler was getting angry at the garbage man outside. So, hello, Fiddler. Hello. Um, so yeah, I will take the dictionary and I'll find different words, just new words, words I didn't really realize all of the meaning in them. Sometimes you find really interesting things when you actually read the definition of a word you think you know. There are lots of resources out there for writing prompts to books that I like to use for my workshop. The Daily Poet, The Crafty Poet. I highly recommend both of these books. You can also just go online and Google prompts for poetry writing. But like I said, one of the best ways I find inspiration is reading other poetry. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope it encourages you to write some poetry, and I look forward to seeing your poems. Thank you.